To defeat an enemy, defeat his strategy.
The science of strategy is only to be acquired by experience and by studying the campaigns of all great captains.
Strategy is the art of employing battles to gain the objective of the war.
Strategy is the art of distributing and applying the military means to fulfill the ends of policy.
Our strategy to go after this army is very, very simple. First, we're going to cut it off, and then we're going to kill it.
Military writings are filled with descriptions, discussions, and often contradictory definitions of strategy. This common military term has been around since the beginning of written military history. About 500 BC, the Chinese military philosopher Sun Tzu wrote that the best way to defeat an enemy is to defeat his strategy. More recently, British Major General and military strategist J.F.C. Fuller wrote that the aim of strategy is to clinch a political argument by means of force instead of words. Simply put, strategy couples the objective, what is to be achieved.
Our objectives are clear. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait. The legitimate government of Kuwait will be restored to its rightful place, and Kuwait will once again be free.
With the means, how it is to be achieved.
The armed forces of the United States began an operation at the direction of the President to force Saddam Hussein to withdraw his troops from Kuwait and to end his occupation of that country.
Also commonplace in military discussions is the term doctrine. Doctrine, in many ways, has a mystical aura that places it in the realm of high-level policymakers. But doctrine is nothing more than guidance on how best to accomplish the mission. For warfighters, doctrine serves as a guide to winning in combat. Doctrine's worth is that it draws upon the hard-learned lessons of past battles, incorporates new concepts and ideas, and presents us with those lessons to help in decision-making. Doctrine and strategy are linked in that doctrine offers an analysis of lessons learned from which to devise and carry out a strategy. Strategy, then, represents an implementation of doctrine. Let's now consider the concepts of doctrine and strategy more closely. However military strategy is defined, its fundamentals are remarkably constant. Military leaders have always struggled to overcome the problems involved in marshaling and using military forces to achieve a desired objective. The modern military leader's role has become more complicated. Today's military forces are generally more lethal and far more complex. America's military forces operate globally on the land and sea, and in air and space. These and other factors complicate the making of modern military strategy. Today's military leader must also cope with a breathtaking rate of technological change that continues to accelerate. The struggle to use available technology effectively, or to cope with the enemy's technology, has become essential to strategic thought and application. Technology has and will continue to shape the way wars are fought.
All of their guns and all of the missiles were useless because they didn't know where to point. Now, they tried to shoot the airplane anyway. They just took the guns and missiles and fired them at empty space, hoping that an airplane would fly through them.
Also, the range of military operations within which military strategists must now operate runs from total war to wars of nationalism. Increasingly, military leaders must devise strategies for military operations other than war. Humanitarian assistance and peace operations fall outside of traditional military operations, but nonetheless require the military strategist to devise plans for the use of military forces. The complexity of modern military decision-making often obscures the fact that the fundamental goal of military strategy remains unchanged. Despite fiscal constraints, the challenges of technology, military operations other than war, and regional conflicts, the role of the military strategist remains the same. As it has been throughout history, the strategist's task is still to overcome the problems of deploying and employing military force to accomplish an objective. During earlier eras, such as those of Frederick the Great or Napoleon, One military commander could make the decisions required to produce and implement strategy. In those relatively simple times, military leaders could decide issues ranging from the broadest political direction to the most detailed battlefield tactics. Drawing upon their genius and experience, such leaders were able both to devise and implement military strategy. The complexity of modern military operations virtually eliminates the possibility of one person's ability to grasp all facets of a situation. The result is that strategy is now made by different people or groups with different perspectives at different levels of authority. What hasn't changed, however, is that in developing strategy, these people must still rely on the experiences of what has and hasn't worked in similar situations. Although developing military strategy involves numerous considerations and complexities, doctrine provides a foundation from which to suggest and assess courses of action. Doctrine has an important effect upon the strategy process. It provides a basis for understanding the experiences gained from military history, the appropriateness of new theories, the validity of exercises, and a means of evaluating emerging technologies. The principal source of doctrine is experience, but experience by itself has limited utility. As Frederick the Great pointed out, if experience had been all-important, he had several pack mules who had seen enough of war to be field marshals. The real key is the accurate analysis and interpretation of history and the experience it provides. Experience and its analysis are not exclusive sources of doctrine. For some subjects, such as nuclear warfare, there is no experience on which to base beliefs. Only 2 nuclear weapons have been used in the history of mankind, and this experience provides little basis for developing nuclear war fighting strategies. Similarly, experience is limited in emerging missions, like those connected to military operations other than war. Also, the level at which the strategy formulation takes place determines the facts, guesses, and experiences which must be considered. Modern military theory divides war into strategic, operational, and tactical levels. These 3 levels allow the nature of conflict to be understood better. The boundaries between these levels tend to blur and do not necessarily correspond to levels of command. Nevertheless, in the American view, the strategic level is usually the concern of the national command authorities and the highest military commanders. The operational level is the concern of theater commanders, and the tactical level is the focus of subordinate commanders. The strategic, operational, and tactical levels of war roughly correspond to the national military strategy, operational strategy, and battlefield strategy or tactics. National military strategy is established by the national command authorities with the advice and assistance of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. National military strategy translates policy objectives into strategic military objectives that can be achieved using military forces. At this level, strategists seek a clear and logical connection between political goals and military means. The operational level is concerned with employing military forces in a theater of operations. This level seeks to obtain military goals through the design, organization, and conduct of campaigns and major operations.
When we knew that he couldn't see us anymore, we did a massive movement of troops all the way out to the west. So this was absolutely an extraordinary move, I must tell you. I can't recall any time in the annals of military history when this number of forces have moved over this distance to put themselves in a position to be able to attack.
A principal task of strategy at the operational level is to identify and concentrate operations against the enemy's centers of gravity. The maneuvers, engagements, and battles that would go toward achieving the operational level objectives make up the tactical level of warfare. At this level, strategy is most often referred to as tactics. The tactical level translates potential combat power into objectives through decisions and actions on how to fight and win battles.
This is a modern battlefield out here. Got huge expanses, a lot of maneuver room. And the dumbest thing in the world you do is you go right into the teeth of the enemy and play his game. We're not going to play his game out here.
In actual practice, there are no fixed boundaries between the levels of warfare or strategy. The operational level bridges the gap between strategic guidance and tactical application. Thinking of war and conflict as being divided into 3 levels does, however, provide a convenient concept for planning and a practical framework for execution. Doctrine, like strategy, has three levels of application. At the strategic level is basic doctrine. At the operational level is operational doctrine. And at the tactical level, doctrine is often referred to as tactics, techniques, and procedures. Basic doctrine represents the fundamental beliefs of the service and embodies the institutional identity. Air Force basic doctrine is shaped in direction and tone by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Operational doctrine describes concepts for conducting theater-wide operations and is the bridge between the broader basic doctrine and more defined operations pertinent to the theater level. Tactical doctrine has been most often referred to as tactics, techniques, and procedures. Tactics, techniques, and procedures are the products of doctrine at the tactical level of application. At whatever level, doctrine is what we believe about the best way to accomplish the mission. Doctrine at all levels embodies the notion that one must train and equip like you're going to fight to win, and win by doing what works. Our doctrine is the repository of those lessons on what works. Doctrine has many functions. One function, as just mentioned, is to provide a tempered analysis of experience and thus a common basis of knowledge and understanding that can provide guidance for actions. Another is to teach those beliefs to each succeeding generation. Yet another expresses our institutional beliefs to other services and serves as a common language between services. All these functions come together in doctrine's relationship to strategy. Doctrine provides, in essence, a knowledge base for making strategy decisions. Doctrine used at the highest levels tends to be somewhat abstract, becomes more defined at the operational level, and often is very specific at the tactical level. At all levels, however, it provides the foundation from which to begin thinking about specific decisions. Without doctrine, military strategists would have to make decisions without points of reference. They would continually be faced with the prospect of reinventing the wheel and risk repeating past mistakes. Doctrine is the storehouse of analyzed experience and military wisdom and should be the strategist's fundamental guide in decision-making, no matter the level of strategy. In developing strategy, the first reference should be to doctrine. Based upon the experience, analysis, and the considered thought provided by doctrine, a strategy is shaped to achieve the objectives required of the conflict.
I think the whole purpose of our strategy, which has been enunciated a number of times, is to continue, when the operative word is pound, to continue to pound that force to attrit it to the point where either they'll decide to give up or they'll be weak enough for us to reasonably go in and get them.
At the strategic level, the strategy will likely remain constant.
Drive Saddam from Kuwait by force.
While at the operational level, some changes will be necessary to meet the demands of the theater.
The shift from the first set of targets from the Baghdad area as well as the airfield and air defense complex, and will now begin concentrating on the Republican Guard and some of the forces in theater.
And at the tactical level, strategies may change vastly to accommodate changing tactical situations. Once concluded, the conflict must be analyzed for lessons on what did or did not work. From this critical analysis, lessons are learned or past lessons are validated. Military exercises, wargaming, doctrinal research, and theory are analyzed to validate the lessons gleaned. From these considerations, doctrine evolves. The process of critically analyzing past lessons and validating concepts makes doctrine a valuable tool on which to base decisions of how best to fight and win the next conflict. If this were the entire process, then strategy formulation would be relatively straightforward, and doctrine could be used almost as a checklist. But it isn't. And doctrine can never be seen as a checklist. Doctrine's significance to strategy is in the insights it provides, but often its counsel is disregarded in the face of many influences shaping strategy. As important as doctrine is, and should be in making military strategy, it is often ignored or dismissed. This tendency has been most notable since World War II, as traditional military doctrine has often clashed with political decisions in conducting warfare. In both Korea and Vietnam, military leaders chafed under the close control of civilians whose decisions about the conduct of the war often ran counter to military advice and doctrine. The frustrations of Korea and Vietnam highlight the fact that even though doctrine may serve as the basis for strategy decisions, the road from doctrine to strategy implementation is influenced by a host of factors outside and inside of the military environment. Military strategies of the post-World War II era were shaped by a national policy of containment and dramatically influenced by the concepts on deterrence and nuclear war.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
These strategies and their doctrines were dependent upon a defense budget to support them. A budget which allows the military to fight regional conflicts today would be unable to support the past strategy of containment. Thus, as the security threat shifts, so too must strategies and doctrines shift to accommodate these influences. When doctrines and strategies become out of date, the results are usually disastrous. Technology has had and continues to have a significant influence on strategy, and thus the influences of technology are significant in shaping strategies and doctrine. 18th century European warfare and the Napoleonic Wars dictated the use of massed formations to properly use the firepower of inaccurate muskets. The advent of rifled muskets in the mid-19th century resulted in the slaughter of the American Civil War, when doctrines and thus strategies were not changed to accommodate the advancements in technology. Doctrine and the strategy devised from it must consider advances in technology which shape the manner in which military force is employed. The critical analysis of history must be viewed within the context of contemporary influences to be effectively used in devising strategy. Many other external actors and factors influence strategy decisions. The effect of public opinion on the conduct of the Vietnam War is well recognized. Public opinion continues to have significant influence on modern military actions. External actors and factors also exert pressures on military operations. The conduct of the Korean and Vietnam Wars was largely influenced by the fear of Chinese intervention and the possibility of plunging the world into a nuclear exchange. The recent Gulf War would likely have been fought differently had the coalition of nations been different. A multitude of influences affect the shift from doctrine to strategy and strategy to doctrine. National politics, emerging technologies, the defense budget, foreign nations as well as non-nation states, alliances and treaties all combine to shape our strategies. Additionally, the Department of Defense has had a history of inter-service rivalries that have influenced our doctrines and strategies. These influences can be beneficial. However, often they impede successful military operations. Thus, in our imperfect world, doctrine has not always had the greatest influence on strategy. Doctrine can, however, still serve as a tool for measuring both success and failure. If military doctrine were followed to a substantial degree and success were not achieved, this would indicate that changes to doctrine were in order. If, on the other hand, success were achieved, the experience of success would also feed the doctrine development process. This brings the doctrine-strategy relationship full circle. In conclusion, it is useful to think of doctrine as a compass bearing. Our basic doctrine gives us a general direction for our strategy and provides a common purpose for all to follow. Operational doctrine steers us with greater accuracy, and tactical doctrine provides even more specific direction. Doctrine and strategy are fused in application, with doctrine serving as a guide for the exercise of professional judgment.
Our strategy to go after this army is very, very simple. First, we're going to cut it off, and then we're going to kill it.
Ultimately, the strategist must rely on professional judgment to marshal and employ military force. A thorough understanding of air and space doctrine provides the air strategist a clear advantage in employing air and space forces as an integral part of the joint team.